Shawn Flynn, thanks for coming on Just Build Wealth. Give us 30 seconds about who you are and what do you do.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. So I focus on mergers, acquisition, growth capital. I'm a middle market investment banker. When I'm not doing that, I also have a podcast as well called the Silicon Valley Podcast. And before that, I was helping companies set up operations overseas. I love traveling, lived abroad for about 8 years, studied mechanical engineering undergrad, but I think that sums it up pretty much.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack. One thing, I was doing some research and I found that you started out, I also worked at Macy's. I wasn't selling shoes, but you sold women's shoes for Macy's. And one of the things that this video that I was watching said was you learned the vocabulary of the person buying. And what do you mean by that?
So I would just sit there and listen and try to hear the key words that they would use. Oh, I'm planning on going to this, party, this dinner, and it was, just cycling it back to them. So whatever they used, these look fun. I'd listen to what they're saying to the person next to them, and I'd go, oh, those shoes really look fun on you, or it looks like you're going to have a great time, or, those are stunning. Whatever the vocabulary I heard that person or their friends use in that circle, I would try to pick out those key words, use that also in the sale of the shoes, and the conversion just was so much higher when you'd kind of match and mimic the words, the tonality, the volume, the everything of just trying to build that rapport as quick as possible with them. I just noticed it would just convert into sales.
Interesting.
And so I would do that. I would on my breaks I would go down to Barnes & Noble, the bookstore, and look at the cover of fashion magazines or what celebrities were wearing what shoes. And then going back after break at Macy's, I would then go, oh, Angelina Jolie was wearing those boots. Aren't those fun? Next thing you know, bam, sale right there. Or did you see the cover of Vogue? Those are in style right now. Those or Stuart Weitzman shoes, or hey, red is what's being picked up a lot these days. Here's some red, and you'd have something to refer it to, some celebrity, some news article, and that. And then once again, the people would associate themselves, they would visualize, they would dream, and just convert. So I picked up a lot of sales techniques, and it was great because you try something new, fails, there's the next person 5 minutes later to try something else on.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the building rapport in this way. Usually when I think of rapport, I think of like finding some common element. But if mirroring, I think that's what you're saying, also works, it sounds like it does. That's another way to build rapport by finding some common gesture or common phrase that they're using and mirror it back to them. That's what you're saying.
Mirror and matching, and our common thing that we're building rapport over were women's shoes. And and not going to say anything, but some women really like to talk about shoes.
That's very funny.
Yes, I understand. So the other fascinating thing, Shawn, is you get a degree in mechanical engineering and you end up gravitating toward investment banking. Talk to us about that transition from from mechanical engineering. I mean, the math skills play in, but what led to one going from one to the other?
It was quite the journey, to be honest. So after college, I really wanted to travel. In fact, the entire time I was in college, I wanted to travel. I wanted to do a semester where I was on the quarter system, a quarter abroad. But because I was doing mechanical engineering, it really wasn't feasible in my major. If I had done that, I would have been pretty behind. I just wouldn't have worked. I thought about it. Because of that, for the last about 2 years in university, I kept thinking, okay, the moment I graduate, I'm going abroad. And I did that. I went to Costa Rica, I went to China, Europe, back to China, and after about 8 years total, I came back to the U.S., and honestly, my engineer skills were pretty outdated at that point. I remember I was in a hostel in Wales. I was about to go to the Doctor Who museum. If anyone here has seen that TV show, it's 40 seasons or whatever. And the person was in the hostel was looking at, I think it was like LabVIEW 3 point something, and I was looking at that book going, wait, I remember LabVIEW like 1. Like what is this? How many versions of this software have been done in the last few years? And I was looking at what he was studying. I just kept thinking, gosh, my skills, I have to go back, refresh everything. And by that point, I wasn't the biggest fan of sitting in front of a computer doing CAD drawings and that. After living abroad for so long, I really enjoyed talking to people, sitting down, and because that's how I learned the language. I learned Spanish and I learned Mandarin more or less from studying in the morning and sitting with people for lunch and dinner and just having as many conversations as possible. And through that, just having to listen to people and try to pick up, because when you're learning a language, you don't understand 99% of what's being told to you. You're just nodding your head, guessing. And it was through learning languages and having interactions with people that I thought, gosh, I just want to do something in the future where it's more person to person than person to computer. Mm-hmm. And investment banking, there was definitely more steps between coming back to the U.S., helping companies set up, working with an angel group, doing deal flow, all that led to the investment banking. So it wasn't a direct switch, but investment banking itself, it's very people intensive. A lot of people think that, you're just sitting there with an Excel sheet, but reality, yeah, there's that research team in the back or the part of the team that does that, but there is that part that's more client facing, the one that's sitting at the table, making sure conversations are going, making sure temperatures, people's are keeping things in check, that they understand next steps, that there's just conversations moving forward. And I mean, that's the part about investment banking I really enjoy, is the people, the having to learn constantly, because every engagement is so different, but the people aspect of it is incredible.
So it sounds like for investment banking, it wasn't, or for versus mechanical engineering, it wasn't that you're like, I'm really enjoying mechanical engineering. There's got to be a commonality in investment banking. It was that I need to speak with people more, and I'm not getting this in mechanical engineering.
Kind of, and really after college, I never used mechanical engineering. I never went into that field. When I was in Costa Rica, I was doing odd jobs. China, I started a couple companies. None of what I did that 8 years was sitting down with AutoCAD, with LabVIEW, with designing really anything, but it was all people focused. Mm-hmm. It was all having conversations, doing some type of sales, doing some type of marketing, biz dev, building relationships, building networks. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that. And I think the engineering was a huge foundation for it, in the fact that it taught me how to plan, it taught me step by steps, how to break situations down into components to move things forward. The knowledge that I learned through studying mechanical engineering has definitely shaped my life forever. And I think it's a huge component in my thought process and how I go about deals in investment banking. But, a lot of the transition, it was slow. Like I said, it was overseas for about years. I came back. I got involved in the startup ecosystem. I was doing deal screening for an angel group. I was helping companies set up operations between Silicon Valley and China. And then I got into investment banking after already being back in the U.S. for about, six and a half years. So it was quite the journey.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that you've set up a couple different companies, and I'm curious, I've heard a lot of definitions of when a company is started, but I'm curious about your definition. Is it when they get cash flow, or is it when they buy the domain? Because that's an important thing, right? Maybe not. Do you have a definition that you use of when a company is actually started?
If it was to buy the domain, I'd probably have like 40 companies right now.
They have a name for that. I think they call that domain hoarding, right?
You always have a good idea, and then 5 minutes later, you're like, I'll work on it later.
Yeah.
No. For me, companies, when you have that first customer paying for whatever you're selling, That's my definition of having a business.
Okay.
Up until then, it's just an idea for me.
Okay. So it doesn't need to have profit. It just needs to have some sort of revenue, because if you can figure out how to systematize everything, then you can figure out a way to make profit maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for starting a business, yeah. For it to be a real business, you got to know your numbers. You have to build it out. You have to be able to pay yourself something at the end of the day. So
another one on small companies and starting, finding product market fit. And I'm curious about specifically getting feedback from initial customers. Do you have a way that you advise companies on how to do that?
a lot of conversations before trying to invest into building out the product. Find out if the market really wants it. Test as many ways as possible. You know, there's so many. There's, you know, Venture Validator's a company that will do product market testing for you, where they'll go out, do 100, 200, 300 surveys of potential users of your product, find out what a price point would be, find out what new features would have to be, find out, you know, just a lot of stuff, so you don't have to waste a year or 2 years or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And stuff like that, where you're going out and asking questions before building it, then asking questions while you're building it, then asking questions after you've built it, and continually to iterate the product or the process or the service you're providing. It's so key to success, because everything's changing. So, I mean, constantly asking questions, I think, is the best advice there.
And I suppose the question is just about, like, would you use this, or is there a more nuanced question to be asking, or trying to find the root cause of?
Oh, I mean, there's so many questions that you can go about asking, from, you know, as you mentioned, would you use this, to what's the price point would be if you didn't have this after you used it? Would that be, you know, detrimental? Would that be an inconvenience? What other substitutes are you currently using? Mm-hmm. What additional feature, if this had, would you order it or buy it? A great question just for anyone after you start having the conversation is, okay, we're taking pre-orders. Do you want to pre-order right now? Do you want to put down 10% deposit for this? Just something where there's a little bit of skin in the game, where you can tell right then if it was just all kind of fluff in the last conversation, or if, oh no, they're serious about wanting this product, and if we can deliver, we have a sale. So there's an art to it, you know.
So here's another step along the road, Shawn, and that is, you've made comments about a milestone at about 2 million EBITDA. I think the term is the doors open when you get to hit that number. Give us a little bit more color on that statement.
Great. So for investment banking, when we're having conversations with companies that are looking to get acquired, they often ask us about multiples. They often ask us about the appetite for buyers in the market at this time, or what, from our experience, what it would be. And when we have these conversations, kind of different doors open up at different sizes of the company. I mean, if the company is doing $500,000 in EBITDA, you know, the buyer is probably going to be someone local, an individual, maybe a family office. If the numbers get to, you know, 1 million EBITDA, now some institutions will start considering it. You get to 2 million EBITDA, that's a nice little line in the sand, where once you cross it, there's a lot more interest from private equity groups, from institutions that, you know, are professional buyers. Now when you start getting to like 5 million EBITDA, now you start becoming in that platform range, where the buyers are thinking, okay, there's enough systems and processes built out in this company that we can add on other companies to it. So none of these things, I mean, a company maybe 2 million EBITDA could be a platform company, or 10 million EBITDA could be an add-on company. But what I'm saying is, there's kind of certain numbers and metrics and size of these companies, where conversations start where, hey, most likely if it's this size, it's we could look at it as a platform. If it's this size, we're looking at it as an add-on because it's a big enough company for us to write a check. It's big enough that, it's pretty, a lot of things have been de-risked. And then there's other size companies that are like, yeah, we like that company, but it's just too small for us to write a check, too small for us to get involved for this type of buyer. But then this other type of buyer is like, oh, that's the perfect size for us. So it really just kind of segments the different companies for who are the potential buyers, acquirers of them.
Interesting. And it sounds like there's a story element to this too. You've said in the past that storytelling oddly fits into being an investment banker. And I'm curious, how central is being able to tell a story in the profession of, or in just the world of investment banking?
I think it's super important. I think being able to tell stories is key to communication, is key to getting the listener engaged in what you're saying, having them pay attention, taking them along a path. For companies, yes, there's what they've done in the past and what they're doing currently, but there's also what they're hoping to do in the future. And that we don't know for sure what it is. So what's the story behind what they're doing in the future? Actually, even going back further, what's the story of how the whole thing, what's the origin story? What were the struggles that they faced, the founders? How did they overcome those? What about the obstacles in the market? What did they do to conquer those beasts and slay those dragons? And how is this team or this company going to survive obstacles in the future? Telling the story is key to packaging a company, packaging a sale, packaging your services, what you're working on. If you can't create that believable story that's engaging, that people want to share, you're kind of at a disadvantage when you're going against someone else that can do that.
So speaking of telling stories, you have another principle out there. You have multiple principles, Shawn. This has to do with speaking engagements. And I think you call it the 8 times 40 times 80 principle. Give us a little bit more explanation of what that means.
How much research did you guys do before this?
Pretty deep research.
I'm impressed. So the 18-40-80 principle, I discovered it a while ago, and when I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, this it resonated with me. It's when you're 18 years old, you care about what everyone thinks about you. Everything you're doing, like, oh my gosh, there's all eyes on me, I'm embarrassed. Then when you're at, you're 40 years old, you go, I don't care what others think, I'm going to do this on my, however I want to do it, I'm going to go forward, I'm going to do what I want. And then when you're 80, you realize no one ever cared what you were doing. And so the goal is to get to that 80-year-old, as soon as possible. Not in age, but the mindset of that. Because once you're at that point where no one really cares, it's freeing. You'll take more chances. You'll get your face out there. You'll sit on more panels, give more talks, because you'll realize, okay, whatever I did today, yeah, it's this moment in time, and tomorrow, it's a new audience, people aren't going to dwell on it. What you thought you said something wrong in a podcast interview a month ago, it's already been forgotten. So get out there, keep going.
It's very true, because nowadays there's just so much content out there, right? You make a mistake, not a big deal. I mean, some mistakes are bigger than others, but at the end of the day, we don't know the names of so many people that lived 100 years ago, and nobody's going to know our names. And so it's like, all right, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a good time, and it's good to remember it in that context too. I like that a lot. Speaking of a lot of content, you also have a podcast, and I'm curious, A, what's the name of it so we can make sure people know about it? B, what are the benefits of having a podcast as an investment banker?
So the name of the podcast is The Silicon Valley Podcast. Very easy to remember. I was amazed I got the domain.
Yeah, right. The domain.
Sitting on domains there. The podcast itself, it's actually been a blessing. I had no idea the impact it would have on my career when I started it. In fact, it started off actually as a public access TV show that I was just using because I wanted to outsource as much of my work as possible. At that time, I was helping companies set up operations in tech parks in China, and Chinese companies set up operations in Silicon Valley. And instead of making constant introductions, I just wanted, okay, here are some recorded interviews with a commercial real estate agent, with a patent lawyer, check out these interviews. Then if you have follow-up questions, let me know. I'll make intros. And then I got introduced to a podcast platform. They asked if I wanted to do a podcast. That turned out great. I was there for 6 months. Then I spun out and did my own podcast, The Silicon Valley Podcast. And since then, I've gotten to sit down with the most incredible people. Avram Miller, co-founder of Intel Capital. Melanie Perkins, Canva. Jim McKelvey, Square. Sky Kern, Juniper Network. Mark Manili, SailPoint. The list goes on. And I wouldn't have gotten introductions to these people if it wasn't for the podcast. I mean, these were all warm introductions of, hey, would you like to have a conversation with the founder of Grubhub? Yeah, I definitely would like to have that conversation. And through that, I've actually got several introductions for the investment banking where people have said, Shawn, I've listened to your podcast. You seem like a great guy. We have a company we're looking to sell. We have a company we're looking to raise capital for. Are you open for a conversation? So it's really been able to separate me among the other investment bankers out there who, one thing about our industry is people are not very good at brand building. Being out there in the public eye, talking at events, what separates there are a few investment banks that everyone knows about, but for the most part, especially that middle market segment, no one really knows any investment banker that they haven't played golf with or gone to the yacht club or something. There's no, if you were to Google search, what really comes up. But because of the podcast, I've been able to really differentiate myself among many out there, and I've gotten some amazing introductions from it, and yeah, it's been a godsend.
So it's A, great networking device because it helps you connect with people. B, great marketing device because you're getting your name out there. C, helps you ask better questions because you really got to think and do research about somebody, as you know. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the learning aspect of it is just incredible. Sitting down in advance, writing out what I'm curious to learn from this person who's at the top of the game, who's that 0.001% in whatever they're working on, and getting an hour or an hour and a half of their time is incredible. And then building that relationship. Like, for example, Steve Snyder, he raised $1 billion for his company. It was prior to Tesla's electric car company. I actually have a call with him today at 3 o'clock to talk about something else. And it was all because of that podcast that I got introduced to him a year and a half ago. And there's a lot of these guests that I've been able to maintain relationships with post the podcast, which I just shake my head because I'm like, God, it's so difficult to get these people's time. But through a podcast, it's really incredible how you can build someone's trust in a short amount of time.
It's interesting. So we have questions on selling a business and merging a business. I want to jump past those for a second and talk about your newsletter and LinkedIn activities, because I think it's on the same in the same context as this conversation. And I know that you have a vibrant LinkedIn activity base and that you're doing a newsletter, I think. I'm just curious, like how did you start doing those types of things?
The newsletter I started, that was my goal for 2023. I wanted to start either a email newsletter or Well, I looked into that and I thought most of the email newsletters I get just go straight to, spam, or I don't read them.
Yeah.
But LinkedIn, when I have a moment, the newsletters I subscribe to, I actually will look through them. And I thought, okay, if I did it on LinkedIn, I'll probably get my connections and some second-degree connections that will look at it and maybe some reshares. And so my 2023 goal was to start a newsletter, and I decided to do it on LinkedIn. I also have it on Medium as well.
It's done through LinkedIn then?
Yeah, so I just post it where at the homepage you have that option of, post, video, article. So I just have the article, click on that, and every Tuesday morning I release a new newsletter there and on Medium. So Tuesday I release the newsletter, Wednesday I release the podcast, and then I try to do either 1 or 2 speaking engagements a month for my networking, my marketing.
Dad, did you have specific questions about the LinkedIn or the newsletter?
So without thinking much about it, Shawn, I subscribed. Oh, maybe it was last year, and it seems like, as you just described, once a week I get something, and it isn't so much that it was in my LinkedIn feed, because, in all honesty, I have a hard time looking at that in many cases. It literally is a direct email to me that you have posted something, you have an event or something like that. So my question is, how do you arrange it so that instead of it just showing up in a feed, it shows up in my email?
Oh, so for events and that is through a newsletter. I use MailChimp for that. So that is, whenever I host events, you're on the email list for that. So sorry.
Well, that's fine. I mean, but I simply didn't know how you did it. So that's not necessarily a LinkedIn thing. That is a MailChimp kind of thing.
That is separate. So I also try, like I mentioned, I try to be a speaker on either a panel or a judge or something. I want to try 2 times a month. Anytime I do any of those, I send out an email. And my whole goal for all this is to try to stay top of mind with all my connections. Just because the most painful thing to hear is sitting down with coffee with someone, and they go, "Oh, Shawn, I just made this intro to a company to do 20 million EBITDA to so-and-so, and I completely forgot. Oh, I'm so sorry." And you're like...
You're like, really? Come on now, man.
Yeah. You can still do it. Still make the intro.
So my sense is that it's through those sources that you kind of maintain your relevance, and that's how you cultivate the investment banking pipeline. Is that accurate?
Yep. Try to stay top of mind with the network and keep expanding it in that middle market area.
Interesting. And I'm curious just about cultivating that network. How do you keep connecting with them? Is it through emails, or are you calling them every week, or how are you kind of maintaining constant contact?
Good question. For a lot of the network, it's just regularly posted on social media. Having that Tuesday post newsletter, that Wednesday podcast release. But then it's also, okay, who here would be a great guest for a live recording, and try to reach out to 100, 200 people. Once every 6 months or so, I try to put on a big event of 150, 200 people where I'm personally emailing or LinkedIn a large number of my connections. I try to at least have some type of touch point with the majority of my circle once or twice a year. And it is kind of, how do I say, I think it's one of the things I do well is just allocating a set amount of time every week, and it's really about an hour a day just for marketing, just for promotion on different social media channels or for events or that. Just to go back to try to stay top of mind.
Yeah, we had another question about that. How much time are you spending on it? Is that just when you're going in and emailing people, or you're creating the content and then you're pushing it out? Or are you like having any like outsource? I think you talked about outsourcing a little while ago, but do you use any outsourcing for that?
Yeah. For outsourcing, I do have a virtual assistant in the Philippines that does the editing of the podcast, editing of the videos. Really does a great job. For the newsletter and that, I do it myself. For a lot of the posting, honestly, my wife, she has a marketing company where she does individuals and small businesses marketing. So she also has taken on the Silicon Valley podcast as a client and does a fantastic job. So if you ever look at the thumbnails or the Eventbrite post or the collateral, she's the creator of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Shall we speak about selling a business?
So, Shawn, you and I have had these conversations. I'm fascinated with what you would describe as the timeline from the point where you decide, look, I need to do a transaction. There's a roadmap along until you finally get that done. Is there a normal timeline that occurs with every different type of business, or is it very industry or specific situation specific?
It's pretty similar in the 6 to 9 month time frame. And why is it that long? A lot of the processes, the steps in it, are pretty similar in the sense that, building out the data. So just an overview of the whole process, and then we can kind of go back and kind of look at the time for each step. You build out the data room. You build out the marketing material and the buyer investor list, depending on what we'll say it's an acquisition, the buyer's list. You go out to market. You narrow and whittle those conversations down. You accept an indication of interest, negotiate that, get the letter of intent, find that one that you're interested in, go into due diligence, wrap things up. But for each of those steps, building out the data room, some companies, they have it prepared for the most part before they even talk to an investment banker. Others need time to build it out. Luckily, when you charge a retainer, they move pretty fast. So we'll say a month right there. Then you have the building out the marketing materials, getting approval. Maybe there's 3 iterations of them. So maybe that's another month. Also the buyer's list to have that complete. So you're at 2 months right now. Now we're going out to having those conversations, email, phone call, coffee meetings, whatever it is. Say you're reaching out to, we'll say 1,000 people just so the numbers are easy. That takes, this week you reach out to a couple hundred, next week another couple hundred, then follow up with the first group, follow up with the second group. That's a month right there. Now you're having some phone calls, get an indication of interest, tell them, hey, we want this on this date. Maybe everyone needs 2 or 3 weeks to get that done. Another 3 weeks go by. Okay, these are the ones we're moving forward with for the LOIs. We need these by this date. Another couple weeks go by. We're at 4 months right now, more or less. Sign the LOI, go into due diligence, 90 days, 3 months. So 7-8 months right there. So things move super fast, 6 months. A little bit slower, 9 months. Not uncommon for a year. Sometimes you'll get that very early. You built out the data room, go out, market it, and there's someone that just calls you day one and goes, listen, we're going to make this offer. Stop the process right now. We want to move forward. This offer is fantastic. And the buyer's like, wow, this offer fits everything I need. Go right into due diligence. That's a lot shorter. But yeah, 6 to 9 months is a good timeline to look at for this process.
You said multiple times the word data room.
Oh, data room. So
what does that mean?
Good question. A data room is basically one area where all the information, or as much as possible, of the company is put in one central location. So think of the data room. You might have one folder for financials. It'll have the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow statements, the bank statements, your tax form, everything there for financials. Then you might have another one for HR, another one for sales and marketing, another one. So there'll be a lot of folders there, but it's basically just put all the information of the company, articles of incorporation, your cap table, your pro forma, everything that someone would need to pretty much have an understanding of the whole business. And that's going to be used later in the due diligence. Yes, in the due diligence, whoever is most likely going to ask for a lot more items that aren't there. Mm-hmm. But that gives you, but you put everything there from the start so you can use that information to build out the marketing materials. So when all this is there, we can go in there and create this document, this 60-page document. Some people call it the confidential information memorandum, where it's, here's the outline of the company. These are the financials for the last few years. Here's the core, the founders and the team. Here's what it looks like for the next few years. Here's the competition. Here, you know, and all that is created based on that information in the data room. And that should answer, 95% of the questions that someone might have when they're interested in potentially acquiring a company. So if that gets out 95% of the questions, that person who you're talking with later on that hour-long phone call or 3-hour management or whatever, they're only there because there's that high conviction that they want to acquire this company. No one wants to waste people's time. You don't want someone calling you and go, hey, I don't know, tell me about the year this company was incorporated. You don't want you're like, oh, it's right there in the sim. It was incorporated this year. It grew this amount for the last 5 years. It's there so they can find it on their own. Yeah. They understand the company. They understand the business. They understand where they would fit in. They have general ideas of what their offer would be, changes they would make, whatever. But to create this huge document, you really need that information first, and that's what's in the data room.
Interesting. Okay, so that's what the data room. I was going to ask, how do you present documentation when conducting a merger versus a sale? And it seems like in both of those cases, you would be creating a data room, which is it's a selection of folders that have all the documents that you would need to say, like, this is who we are and this is what we do.
And that's the same also when you're going out to raise growth capital, or you'll hear these startups raising around. They might not have it, but investors, angels, VCs, they'll want to find out about the company, and to have it all built out in advance. Hey, here's the folder, the articles of incorporation. Here's the folder that have all the employees' contracts. Here's the folder that has our cap table and how things are distributed. Here, it just makes life so much easier. So instead of finding stuff later when they ask for the items, it's all there in one place. So it's really recommended, no matter what these major transactions you're doing, just to start off by building out the data room. Because another thing that it's really beneficial when you're building it out, you're going to see the gaps in your company. You're going to start looking at the metrics and comparing it to industry average and go, wait a second, our cost per acquiring a customer is lower than, I didn't know that. Oh, our lifetime. If you've already been tracking these, fantastic. They're there. You can see the progress. But a lot of people, when they're building out, they're going to find those skeletons. They're going to go, wait a second, we hired this contractor way back when, and we never had an agreement with them. Who owns the IP of the product they worked on? Oh, that's odd. We got to go back and get something signed. Hey, that's odd. When we let this person go, we never did proper documentation. When we, people will discover a lot. Or hey, we have 2 safe notes out with the one investor with different valuations of the. We got to go back and clean this up. You'll start discovering stuff.
This might be a good exercise to go through, even if you're not considering selling something, because it's like taking a personal inventory of who you are, right, as a company.
Yeah. You should do it really from the beginning and just keep updating it as the company, on a quarterly basis, maybe even a monthly basis. There's companies out there that will update it, use that information for a monthly newsletter that they send out to potential investors, partners, and that, and just keep updating it on a monthly basis, where it's, hey, in the last month we've accomplished this. Here are things we're working on for the next few months. Here are some items we'd like some help with. If you know anyone that can make an introduction, nice simple newsletter, send it out. A month goes by, update the data room, take the new information, newsletter, send that out. stay top of mind with your potential investors, partners, everyone. Stay current with your company. No surprises. Things run smoothly.
Mm-hmm. You want to ask him about merging versus selling?
Well, so I don't know. I tend to think much of that was covered, and I think we're coming up on an hour. So let's go ahead and,
sure.
Ryan, why don't you hit him with the final four?
Yeah, not a problem. So these are the questions we ask to everybody. Do you have a few favorite books or media or podcasts that you've consumed within the last, I don't know, year, 6 months that have guided your thinking in some way?
Good question. So I'm going to do a couple plugs now. I just read this book by Richard Moran.
Oh.
Never Say Whatever. His interview's coming out shortly on my podcast. And then I also just read Software Profit Streams. Just got released by Luke Hoffman. I've interviewed him on my show in the past. Also doing a repeat interview for that book on Wednesday. And then also A Line in the Dot. This interview
you had them all really handy.
They're right next to me on the table right here. I read a lot. I'll read a book or two a week.
Yeah.
Just always a lot of business books. There's a lot of books that I think have shaped my life over the last year. I constantly have my Kindle in front of me. In fact, one of your past guests, Adam Coffey, I read his books. His books are fantastic.
Yeah.
The Private Equity Playbook.
Yeah.
There's two others.
The Exit book, Exit Playbook, Exit Strategy Playbook.
In fact, one of his books, the Equity Playbook, I've recommended it many times to people we've worked with because it really explains the second bite of the apple, which is the rollover component. And the way he does it, I really like it. So I highly recommend that book for anyone out there thinking of selling a company or just want to learn about private equity and next steps.
That's perfect. Well, thanks for the plug there too. He was on the show, I think episode 3 or 4. He was great. He had one of the easily the best intros I've ever heard. It was wonderful. Second to yours, of course.
Thank you.
Next question: tools that you love. What are some tools that you use in your work, in your life that you just like? Everybody should use this.
Does just having an iPad with you, does that count?
Yeah.
All right. I always have an iPad with me, just taking notes, reading Kindle books, just PDFs are sent to me. I love it. For, tools, I don't use anything that's special. I mean, Google does everything for me, more or less, Word docs and that. I'm trying to think. Canva is a blessing, and
kind of a lot.
I'm on LinkedIn all day long.
We hear these things a lot. This is great. I haven't heard Canva that much, but I use Canva all the time. Canva's
great.
It makes me look like a designer, and I am not a designer. I'm not a designer. Favorite thing to do outside of work?
I think that my podcast is actually my favorite.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just really enjoy it. I really enjoy talking to people, having those conversations. Other than that, I got lazy over the pandemic and lost a ton of muscle mass and gained basically I don't fit in my pants anymore. I'm basically wearing sweatpants all the time. So I started going to the gym about 2 months ago and trying to make that 3 to 4 day of the week habit, and I'm really enjoying getting back in the gym. I used to go to the gym all the time before the pandemic. I used to do jiu-jitsu. I plan on starting that up again in a few months. So outside of work, sports, try to stay active.
Cool. Last one, how can people find you?
LinkedIn is best, so just look for Shawn Flynn, SHAWN FLYNN. When I'm not, if not LinkedIn, go to thesiliconvalleypodcast.com. You can find me there. But honestly, LinkedIn is the best way to get in contact with me. I'm there. I check my messages regularly.
Cool. Well, Shawn Flynn, thanks for coming on Just Spell Well. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate the time.
Ryan, Mike, thank you for having me. This has been an honor.